Now, we've actually been looking at a guy by the name of Habakkuk. Can I hear you say Habakkuk? That's right. Habakkuk was a prophet during the time of 612 BC when there was a southern kingdom of Judah. And Habakkuk was a prophet who's calling out to God. And we explored, as we looked at it to begin with last week, Habakkuk was this prophet that's calling out to God. He sees injustice and violence around him. And he's wondering, God, where in the world are you? When are you going to show up? What are you going to do about this? And this is a type of prayer that we call lament. Can I hear you say lament? That's right. Lament is this kind of prayer where we basically say, God, where are you? Have you ever prayed a lament before? You've wondered, God, where are you in the midst of my loneliness? God, where are you in the midst of the brokenness that I carry? Where are you when I've been praying that you would deliver this person that I love? Or where are you when you have not answered these prayers, when I've called out to you day and night? And this is the kind of prayer that Habakkuk offers. Now, in one sense, one of the relieving things about it is that God actually welcomes these prayers of Habakkuk. It's not like Habakkuk is basically giving these prayers and God is like, man, be quiet. Who are you? Like, stop complaining. No, he doesn't do that. He actually welcomes the laments. Now, what's so extraordinary about this book of Habakkuk, though, is Habakkuk is basically giving these laments. God, where are you? When are you going to show up? Violence and injustice are around me. And God basically says this. You can take this to the bank. I will show up. I will deliver you. And he says this, but he says, when God answers Habakkuk, he basically says, but the way that I'm going to deliver you is through Babylon. Now, for some of you, that means nothing, but here's what it meant back then. Babylon was actually the enemy. They were the oppressors that were often committing heinous crimes against God's people. And here's what God is basically saying to Habakkuk. In the midst of your laments, in the midst of your anguish, I'm actually going to deliver you, but it's not going to come the way you expect it. It's going to come through Babylon. And so you can imagine the early listeners to this are like, what in the world? God, are you serious? Babylon? That's how you're going to deliver us? And he says, yeah, through Babylon, through ways that you don't understand or comprehend, ways that you probably can't put your finger on. This is the way that God is going to deliver you. But be assured of this. My deliverance will come, but it will be a mystery. And last week, we invited our church into exploring lament, being God, where are you? But also the mystery of God. God, I don't know how you're going to come through, but I believe that you're going to come through. And now when we come to this passage in chapter 2 of Habakkuk, when he's basically responding to God after God says, Babylon will be your deliverance. Check out what happens in Habakkuk chapter 2. He says, I will stand at my watch. Now, this is what Habakkuk is saying. He's saying, I'm going to stand at my watch. Now, notice the language here. And station myself on the ramparts. In other words, I'm going to wait. I'm going to be here waiting, standing still at the ramparts, staying on my watch. I will look to see what he will say to me and what answer I am to give to this complaint. Then the Lord replied this. He says, write down the revelation and make it plain on tablets. He says, so that a herald may run with it. For the revelation awaits an appointed time. In other words, this is what God is saying. Revelation will come, deliverance will come, but it will come at an appointed time. Now look at God again, the kind of assurance that he's giving to Habakkuk. He says, it speaks of the end and will not prove false. I want you to know this. There's an appointed time. Deliverance is coming. It will not prove false. You can take it to the bank. The God who just with a snap of the finger can change everything in your life. The God who just with a whisper can make the New York Knicks world champions. The God who can do any kind of miracle. This God says, listen, you can take this to the bank. It will not prove false. There is an appointed time. Now look at what it says. Though it linger, wait for it. Though it linger, wait for it. What do you mean it's going to linger, God? He says, listen, I want you to know my deliverance will come, but though it linger, wait for it. And now look at what God says. It will certainly come and it will not delay. Again, you can take it to the bank. But one of the things as I was reading this passage that was so frustrating for me personally was wrestling with this phrase, though it linger. Wait for it. Wait for it. In other words, this is what God is saying. In the midst of some of our most trying moments, in the midst of when it seems like things are utterly dark, in the midst when it feels like God is not answering your prayers, God says, listen, I want you to take this to the bank. My deliverance will come. Turn to your neighbor and say, deliverance will come. That's right, deliverance will come. But we will have to wait for it. Oh, what? We'll have to wait for it? Now, you know what's so fascinating about this? The prayers, the kinds of prayers, these laments that are offered to God, is these laments are moments of anguish before God, where we're like, God, when are you going to show up to heal this illness? God, when are you going to show up when you're going to deliver my family from this situation? God, when are you going to show up when you're going to heal some of the anguish of loneliness that I'm feeling? These moments whenever we've been despondent and we've lifted up laments, what's fascinating is that if you read through the Psalms, again, 2/3 of the prayers or the songs that are lifted to God are laments. Oftentimes, what the Psalms start with is this: wait on the Lord. Wait for him. Wait patiently for the Lord. Now, one of the most frustrating things for me is I hate waiting. And if you're anything like me, and I'm guessing that you are because we're New Yorkers here, one thing that we are very, very bad at is waiting. This past week, my son and I, we were in Vancouver, and when we were in Vancouver, we were at a deli, and at this deli, I was waiting to buy lunch for my son, and so we're waiting, and I was the second person in line. So there was one person that went ahead of me, and this one person, he starts talking, and the person at the cashier who's taking the orders is this young 20-something woman, and they start talking to each other as he makes his order. All he's got to do is just order one sandwich. So he orders this one sandwich, and then later on he says, oh, what's your name? You know, and she shares her name, and he says, oh, what are you up to? What are you up to tonight? You know, and they start talking, and then they start like flirting with one another, kind of in their conversation. And like here I am, and I'm just kind of like, I'm just standing, I'm second in line. And I'm like, I'm staring now. And I'm staring at her, she's laughing, she's saying, oh, hello, are you here? Da, da, da. And I'm just staring, I'm like, and as I'm staring at her, I'm here, and I'm like, I don't have all day for this, even though I'm on vacation. And so my son, who's 7 years old, he says to me, Appa, which means dad in Korean. He goes, Appa, what's taking so long? And I'm like, I trained you well. And I said, I was trying to be loud about it. I was like, I don't know, son. We're only second in line. And I'm just staring. Yeah, but you know the drill. I mean, come on, we're New Yorkers. This is what we do. We are impatient as impatient can get. You know, have you ever had this moment where, especially before in the subways, before it showed how many minutes away something was, which all of us as New Yorkers, even though it shows it, we still don't trust it. And so what we do when we're waiting for the subway, right? We just kind of like, we're waiting for the subway. We're wondering, like, where is this subway? We start asking me, how long have you been waiting here? You know, the person's like, oh, I've maybe 5 minutes. Really? Wow, feels like 20. And have you ever done this, right, where you're like, you're so anxious because you've got to get somewhere, and so what do? You just kind of like, you're just waiting, just like, and then you start praying. I know you've done this, right? You start praying, you're just like, God, if you love me, you will let this train come soon. Then I'll serve you all the days of my life. Have you ever been there? Have you ever been in this moment where you're waiting for the train? You start praying to God, and somehow you think that with just this laser beam kind of gaze down this dark subway tunnel, that somehow that's going to improve your chances. And it won't. Impatience. what it does to us. And especially as New Yorkers, we want things on demand. We want an app for it. We want just a click of something to somehow relieve, especially when we're in anguish. This is what we want. And here God says, hey, though it linger, listen, deliverance will come. You just got to wait for it. You've got to wait. And time again, what God will teach us is that the forming, the crucible by which he begins to transform us and our character is in the ability to wait patiently, to wait on God, to not move according to our impulse, to not succumb to our temptation, to not run to Netflix or to whatever else we look to somehow calm some of our own anxiety, but to wait, to trust him. You know, in the 70s and 80s, there was actually a test that was administered for young children, and it was called the marshmallow test. Or now it's been popularized and called the marshmallow test. Anyone heard of the marshmallow test before? Yeah, and this test was actually a test that was administered where kids would basically be invited to sit and wait. And to basically, if you can wait here for about 15 minutes or so, and again, the time wasn't told to the children, but if you can wait here, you'll get another reward at the end of this 15 minutes or how much time there is that you're waiting. And so kids would have to wait. Now, some kids, of course, would not wait, and they would rush to basically grab this marshmallow and do whatever they can. And we're going to actually watch a little video of this to show how agonizing it is. And now studies actually showed that after the marshmallow test, that years later, studies were done about these kids who had the capacity to wait for this kind of the discipline of waiting, and how in different metrics of one's life, when it comes to relationships, when it comes to their aptitude for learning, all of these different metrics of life, the children who were able to wait, there was actually a greater level of performance when children demonstrate this ability or this capacity to wait for it. Now, here's what we're going to do. We're going to run this video here of the marshmallow test.
Okay, sit in that chair. All right, here's the deal. Marshmallow for you. You can either wait, and I'll give you another one if you wait, or you can eat it now. When I come back, I'll give you another one, so then you'll have two. But stay in here and stay in the chair till I come back, okay? All right. I'm gonna go do something and then I'll come back.
It smells yummy. It smells really good.
So it's up to you. You can have it now or you can wait. Okay? I'll be back. Stay in the chair, okay? Okay. All right, so I'm gonna leave and then I'll come back, okay? So you can either eat it right now or you can wait. Either way, okay? Okay. How'd you do? Did you do good? You did?
Yeah.
You wanted to eat it, didn't you? Yeah. So did I tell you to give you another one? Okay, now you can have both. You need them.
Oh, how cruel was that? Yeah. I think as New Yorkers, we can probably, like some of us just watching that video, we're getting anxious and wondering, just give him the marshmallow. Just eat the marshmallow. I mean, but so many of us, when it comes to patience and waiting, we end up making poor decisions because of our inability to wait. And what God is basically saying to Habakkuk is like, listen, I want you to know this. Just wait. Deliverance will come. Things will change for you. It may not be the way you expect. It might be a mysterious way, but it will come if you just wait. Just wait. You know what's interesting is the Apostle Paul, who's one of the founders of Christianity, he would write to the early church in Galatia, and he'd actually talk about a story from the Old Testament that was very familiar to the early Christians and to the early Jewish Christians that gathered. And it was a story of a guy named Abraham, as well as Sarah, his wife. Now, if you know anything about the story of Abraham, Abraham is the father of faith. Abraham is the one who God gave this promise. I will give you as many offspring as stars in the sky. The only problem is Abraham just kept getting older and older and older, and he had no offspring. And so he was nearing his age he ended up having Isaac, his son, at the age of 100. Can you imagine this? He's been waiting for this promise of God to come through. Now, what Paul actually teaches to the church of Galatia is there's a moment in Abraham's life, though, where he cannot wait. And he does not choose faith, but instead chooses fear. And he ends up getting with a woman named Hagar, and he has a boy named Ishmael. And what Paul talks about is he says that because Abraham lacked faith, he birthed not a son of promise, but instead he gave in to his own impatience, which showed a lack of faith. And the reality is, so many of us, when it comes to our own lives and our own journeys, we are used to birthing Ishmaels instead of Isaacs. Instead of trusting in the promises of God, we end up making poor decisions because of our lack of our ability to wait on God. He says deliverance will come, but so many times we choose not to trust him. And as a result, it leads to sin. It leads to us making bad decisions. Now, if you're someone who's not religious and you're like, what do you mean talking about sin, the sin? Well, sin is basically this. Every single one of us have made decisions that we've regretted, things that we've said or things that we've done or things that we haven't done or things that we didn't say, these regrets that haunt us that show that we weren't living the way we're supposed to live. And this is what sin is. Sin ends up making us choose roads by which we go down that ends up not being pleasing to God, nor does it lead to a flourishing kind of life. And you see, this is what impatience does. Impatience leads us to make mistakes and to sin, to send emails that we don't want to send. Have you ever been there before? Because we were impatient. To say words to people that we didn't want to say. Have you ever been there? To do things with our body that we regretted because we gave in to our anxieties and the temptations that there are. To make decisions related to money, because we did not wait. We did not trust that God is who he says he is and that he will deliver us if we just wait. And so many times the sins that we commit are a result of us not being able to wait. One of our main discipleship courses that we have here at Hope Midtown is something called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. And emotionally healthy spirituality, it's comprised of two different courses. One is emotionally healthy spirituality. One is emotionally healthy relationships. And one of the principles that we talk about week in and week out when we're in this course is the principles that hopefully guides the kind of culture in the community that we're trying to build here is this principle of churn to wonder. And when we talk about churning to wonder, what we say about in our group is that oftentimes we are so quick to judge. We're so quick to put people on trial. We're so quick to kind of sin, essentially. But instead of doing that, what if we were the kind of people that patiently turned to wonder instead? And so here's the principle that we talk about, churning to wonder. If you feel judgmental or defensive when someone else is sharing, ask yourself, I wonder, not, I can't believe this person. I can't believe that this person is so not of God. I can't believe what this person is saying. No, instead of churning to judgment, instead of crucifying someone, will you turn to wonder? I wonder what brought him or her to this belief. I wonder what he or she is feeling right now. I wonder what my reaction teaches me about myself. Now, isn't this, it's basically the discipline to wait. It's basically the discipline to turn to puzzle or wonder instead of jumping to conclusions. Because so many times in my impatience, what I do is I jump to conclusions. I jump to conclusions about God. I jump to conclusions about other people. And I end up crucifying people. I end up sinning more than I should. Jerry Scazzaro, who's one of the authors of Emotionally Healthy Spirituality and the course, she would often say, using the word wonder or puzzled has stopped me from sinning 50% of the time. Because instead of jumping to conclusions, I turn to wonder. I turn to puzzled. I'll share a little bit about how this works. When Tina and I were dating, I knew pretty early on that I wanted to marry her, and she was still deciding, and there comes this moment in our relationship where she's like, it's always been a dream of mine to actually work and live in Seoul, Korea, and to be with her grandmother and her aunt there and to help with her aunt's NGO that she started. And so I didn't want her to go because I thought if she leaves New York, I've missed my opportunity to have her marry me. And so she's like, no, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. We're good. We're in a good place. And so we had been dating for about 4 months, and then she ends up moving to Seoul, Korea. And she knew, though, that I had all of these insecurities about her moving. Because I'm like, what's going to happen? She's going to be in Seoul, and she's probably going to meet all these people. I don't know what's going to happen. And so because she knew that I had all these anxieties, she would do her best to call me or to text me or to send an email practically every day, just making sure that things were okay. Now, she's the type of person that does not do this, but because she cared about me, she did this. And so we would talk regularly, and she would text regularly, and things were going swimmingly well. And then there was a weekend that was a holiday in Seoul. And so this weekend comes, and it's this holiday, and day one passes. And she didn't send me a message. And she didn't call or anything. And I was like, all right, I see how this goes. All right, I see how this goes. Can't believe it. She was just buttering me up until she's gonna bounce. So I'm like, okay, but you know what? I'm still in this. So I can't sleep that night. Day 2 comes along. Still no word from her. And I remember in that moment, I was just day 2 comes along. I'm like, I wonder where she is. She's been telling me what she's been up to day after day. And then I start thinking, oh my goodness, she told me about this filmmaker that she met. And he's this really cool guy who's really talented. And she found him to do this film for this NGO that Tina's aunt started. And and I'm like, oh my goodness, who she's probably with this guy. I can't believe I fell for this. She's probably hanging out with him or something. I cannot believe. And so all of a sudden, I'm just down this rabbit trail. And I start thinking the worst. And then day 3 comes around, still no call. At this point, I am furious. I'm angry. I'm like, I cannot believe her. She was playing me this whole time. I cannot, no evidence prior to this moment would ever lead me to think this, but yet the worst of me is starting to come out, and I just can't wait. I can't wait. And at this point, I've probably left her 10 messages on the phone, and I probably called her 20 more times, but not left a message, And I'm like, I can't wait to talk to her. I can't wait to let her have it. Where were you? Who have you been with? What are you doing? I can't believe you left me. I'm so anxious about this. And during this time, I remember talking with some of my mentors, and we were talking about this idea of churning to wonder, of puzzle. And so finally, on day 4, she calls me, and I see the phone, and I let it ring for a little longer, but not long enough where it goes straight to voicemail. And so I pick up the phone, and she's like, "Hey, Drew." And I'm like, hey. And she's like, "I'm so sorry. I know we haven't talked in the last few days." And I was like, "Yeah, it's been 72 hours." But she's like, I'm sorry. And I was like, "Yeah, I've been, oh man." And right in that moment, I just wanted to let her have it. How could you do this to me? What were you doing? I thought we had an agreement. You let me know what you were up to. But before I say any of that, I say, yeah, I've just been wondering. Just been a bit puzzled about where you've been. How are things going? She goes, "Oh, well, it's been this holiday weekend, and I went away with my cousin to this remote area that didn't have any reception. And it was just a great time for us to retreat and spend some bonding time together. You know that my cousin is one of my best friends, and she's someone that I really wanted to spend a lot of time with while I was in Korea. And the whole time I really wanted to let you know that I was with her, but I didn't. So I'm calling you the first thing I've done to come back into the city, and once I got reception. So that's where I was this weekend, and I missed you terribly." "Oh, that's cool. Yeah, it was no big deal. I missed you too, for sure. I'm so glad you're with your cousin." What does it look like to wait, to patiently wait? I mean, God says, "Hey, deliverance will come. You can take it to the bank. Deliverance will come. It might linger for a bit. But if you can just hold on and just wait for it, it will come at the appointed time. Can you just wait?" Now, the uniqueness of the Christian faith is this, because here's what I can do. I can basically stand before you and basically say, "You see that? So all of us should just grow in our patience. We should basically don't give anyone the evil eye when you're waiting in line for a long time. You should basically kind of walk slowly I can come and say, this is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to muscle up and just become more patient people. And so that we can wait and be more patient. Let's do that." But you see, there's something different about the Christian faith. See, it's never been about each of us somehow muscling up and doing this on our own, and somehow by our own strength being better at this. You see, what the early Christians believed and what they always knew to be true was that the only way that we could ever grow as patient people is by first centering our lives around the one who's been patient first. You see, the book of Hebrews, the author of the book of Hebrews, this is what he writes to the early church. "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses," and again, prior to this, in the book of Hebrews, it talks about a collection of people who trusted God, who had faith in God. "Let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on our own capacity to wait and to be super patient people." No. It says, fixing our eyes on Jesus. And look what it says about Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. "For the joy set before him, he endured the cross." He waited patiently. he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him, not yourself, not your own strength, not your own ability to wait, but consider him who endured, who waited such opposition from sinners so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Like, see, do you see what happens when we come to faith in Jesus? When we begin to center our lives around him, we begin to develop the muscles and the ability to wait, not by our own strength, but when we fix our eyes on the one who waited on our behalf. And it's through him and his endurance and what he has done that we can look to him and say, yes, God is for me and not against me. I can trust that it is true that the God who waited and endured the cross, even to the point of death, is the God who is for me. The God who tells me, who invites me, you can wait on me. In the midst of your anxieties related to your children, you can wait on me. In the midst of some of the struggles that you go through, the loneliness that you feel, you can wait on me. In the midst of some of the feelings of disillusionment related to your own lives and maybe to your marriage, you can wait on me. Deliverance will come. It might linger for a bit, but will you wait? And if we fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, it changes everything. Now, some of us today, we are in impatient mode because this is who we are. We are New Yorkers. This is what we pride ourselves on. And oftentimes, there's an illustration that I've given to talk about kind of our posture before God. And Henry Nouwen, who's a writer who I've come to admire, Henry Nouwen has this image of clenched fists. Can all of you actually clench your fists with me right now? Can you just clench both fists? Do you feel the tension building in your own forearms, in your fingers, and maybe even in your heart? And for many of us, when it comes to the ways in which we live our lives, we live with clenched fists. And we make decisions with clenched fists, running to this decision or that decision before we've waited on the promises of God. We will live with clenched fists, with a low grade or even a high grade amount of anxiety and forcefulness and wanting to control things on our own. Like, do you feel the strain? And one of the things that Henry Nouwen talks about is learning to live with open hands. And if you would, with me, from your clenched fist, if you would just open your hands. Do you feel the relaxation? Do you feel the surrender? Do you feel the vulnerability, the nakedness, the trust of being able to come before God, being able to say, God, I wait on you. I wait patiently for you. Deliverance will come. Though it linger, I will wait. And that's the invitation for each of us today. Whatever you might be going through, whatever anxieties that you might be carrying, whatever fears, whatever prayers and laments that you've offered before God, today I want to give this invitation. Will you just open your hands? Will you move from clenched fists to open hands, offering to God, saying, God, you've heard my cry regarding my family. Will you come and deliver? God, you've heard my cry regarding this physical ailment. Will you deliver? I will wait.